Retzlaff steps up, moving to his right, hoists it deep. And it's underthrown, and it was caught but short of the goal line. It was caught by Chase Roberts, but it doesn't matter. The game is over, and now they can celebrate.
Four-man rush. Guard. Sidearms one down the sideline. That one is going to be picked. Another miscommunication with Juice Wells, and Bryce Thornton does it again.
Really impressive to me. Here comes pressure. Melrose hit as he throws, and it's going to be intercepted. Picked off by Woody Washington, and that should be the dagger.
Direct snap, pitch back, Reed rolls right, dropped! It was dropped! Auburn wins!
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you making me a part of your day again. We are live here on a Tuesday morning, and oh boy, what a finish we're in for in the college football season. Today, obviously, we're gonna be going over all of it. All the madness, all the craziness. As you could tell by the intro, there was a lot that happened, especially in the SEC this past weekend in college football. But we're gonna be going over all of it. This might end up being a little bit of a shorter episode, but not by too much. But we're going to go over all the madness that took place this past weekend in college football. It's going to be an amazing finish. There's going to be so much madness come Selection Sunday for the 12-team playoff. It's actually ridiculous of how much garbage is going on right now. The committee is really going to have their hands full. That's for sure. So obviously you all know I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32, get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. So what are we going over today? Well, last week I basically did the same thing. Outlook on the conferences, past games, you know, the whole gist. You get the whole gist. You guys have been watching this pretty frequently, and I really appreciate all the support. And I feel very blessed doing this, like always. I praise my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, for that every single day. But today, we're going to go over a little bit more in detail when it comes to the conference outlooks and really how the college football playoff is going to shape up. But without hesitating anymore, let's get into some of the past games over this past weekend. We're going to recap Saturday, November 23rd, 2024 real quick. So one of the biggest games, obviously, that was going on and had everybody hyped up. And, you know, rightfully so because it's a top 5 matchup. But at the same time, this one team hasn't improved anything. And yet, after this past weekend, they still haven't improved anything too much, at least in my opinion. So the second-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes handle the Indiana Hoosiers 38-15. So the whole aspect of this game, you know, you have Ohio State, world-renowned juggernaut in college football, and they're hoping to get back to the Big Ten title game for a rematch against Oregon, the only team to beat them so far this season. And Indiana coming into the game 10-0, undefeated. This is the first time Indiana has ever been 10-0 in program history. You know, everybody was wondering how Indiana would stack up against the Buckeyes. Because if you look at Indiana's strength of schedule, they've beaten a bunch of nobodies. But in the same breath, when you play those nobodies, you have to send a message. You have to be dominating those games. And realistically, Indiana was putting belt to rear every single week they played. But now, obviously, in comes Ohio State, one of the best offenses in the country, one of the best offensive lines in the country, one of the best defenses in the country, and overall, widely considered the best college football roster currently right now in college. So everybody was wondering, could Indiana really hold up against the Ohio State onslaught? Well, early on in the game, it seemed to be a shootout, as Indiana took an early 7-0 lead. But after that, Ohio State never looked back. They beat the brakes off of Indiana. Indiana, it seemed like left and right. Every time I watched the TV, Curtis Rourke for Indiana is getting sacked or he's running for his life from the Ohio State Buckeyes pressure. And I'm just going to say it, Caleb Downs he's such an amazing player. Safety for Ohio State, formerly at Alabama. This kid's incredible. He's immaculate. And, you know, Will Howard didn't play bad. He went 22 of 26 for 201 yards, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. But, you know, I've kind of come full circle on Will Howard, especially, you know, I've been talking about Shedeur Sanders and how I didn't really think he was that good. But realistically, I think Shedeur Sanders is a good quarterback. Now, I think he's more of a product of, you know, Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn and all the weapons he has. But I've come full circle on Shedeur. I'm also coming full circle on Will Howard. He's way better than Kyle McCord. You can win a national title with Will Howard. Now, that might be a hot take even for some Buckeye fans, but I think you can legitimately win a national championship with Will Howard at the quarterback. You guys are just so unbelievably stacked at every other position on the team. Running back, A+. Offensive line, A+, A+. Wide receivers, A++. Jeremiah Smith and Mecca Ibuka, come on. You guys are good. Defense, you got Jack Sawyer and Caleb Downs leading the charge on that entire defense. You know, Ohio State's the real deal. Now, obviously, going forward, the game is this week. That's the most important game of the year for any Ohio State fan, and we'll talk a little bit about that going forward in a little bit. But Indiana could not withstand Ohio State's onslaught. Ohio State wins 38-15. Other notable games that happened, number 3 Texas handles Kentucky briefly, 31-14. Now, this was a lot closer than the score indicates. This score is not as close as it really seems. You know, Texas had a 24-7 lead and then a 24-14 lead, but everybody knew that Texas would pull away and win this game. I personally did. And I personally think, yeah, Texas is still favored to win the SEC championship. But again, we're going to go into all of that in a little bit. But Texas survives somewhat. Kentucky, 31-14. Number 4, Penn State going on the road to Minnesota. The Nittany Lions barely avoid an upset, 26-25 over Minnesota. If there was one team I was worried about, it was Penn State. Because Minnesota, you know, they have a tendency to pull these upsets at their home stadium. I believe they did it to Penn State, I want to say, when Trace McSorley was a senior and Saquon Barkley was still there. But, you know, Penn State, they ended up handling business. You know, I don't think Penn State's necessarily that great a team. There's a plethora of teams, actually, in the Big Ten I don't necessarily think are great teams. Now, people are going to, you know, hammer Penn State just because their schedule is soft or whatever. You know, a lot of teams in college football, their schedule is soft. You know, that's nobody's fault. It's just the way the athletic directors, you know, scheduled their games. It's nobody's fault. It's not the coach's fault. It's not the player's fault. Jobs as the coach, you have to have your team ready to play no matter who it is. And the players, you got to play your ass off. That's the whole gist of college football. You can't control who you schedule, who you play. If you're the coach and players, for instance. So Penn State, they end up handling business. Now they are 10-1. 10-1 on the season, and going forward, they'll need some help for the Big Ten title game. Other notable games, number 6, Notre Dame handles number 19 Army 49-14. If there's one thing that Notre Dame loves to do, they love to beat up on our service academies. They really do. It's tragic. I hate seeing this, but Army was a great story. You know, Army is still going to the American Conference Championship against Tulane in 2 weeks, so that'll still be a fun game. If this game was a little bit more respectable, you know, more maybe like a 49-35 sort of game, then I can see Army possibly making a push for the college football playoff, at least one of those final bids, the 11 or 12 seed, especially since Boise State is shooting up in the rankings when it comes to their play and where they can fall in the seeding. Right now, last week in the third installment of the college football playoff rankings, you know, Boise State had I believe they were seeded 12, but they would have the 4th overall seed because of BYU's loss, which would put BYU at the 12 seed because they would still be the lowest rated conference champion. And at that point, you know, you have to choose between Big 12, American Conference and I can't believe that's escaping me. Big 12 and the AAC. And the Mountain West. That's it. Sorry. Other games we're going to get into. And number 8, Miami Hurricanes on senior day handle business against Wake Forest 42-14. This game was a lot closer than people think the final score would indicate, but the Hurricanes ended up going on a 22-0 run in the fourth quarter to pull away from the Demon Deacons. So going forward, we're going to talk about the conference championships real soon. Winning in. That's basically the Miami mantra right now. Okay. Upset in Norman, Oklahoma. Alabama loses to Oklahoma. 5-5 Oklahoma at the time. 24-3, the lowest amount of points that Alabama has scored since the 2011 season, and I think the first time only scoring 3 points since 2010. Oh, boy. Okay, here's my problem with Alabama. So you lose to Vanderbilt. That's bad enough. You lose to Tennessee. Not necessarily a bad loss because Tennessee is up there for the college football playoff. But this might be the worst loss of Kalen DeBoer's career. This might be the worst loss Alabama has had for the better part of damn near 20 years. You lose to a 5-5 Oklahoma team who's dealing with so many injuries on the offensive side of the football. You literally got mollywopped by Alabama. Like, you just got the brakes beat off you by Oklahoma. Alabama, this is absolutely pitiful. 2 weeks ago, when Alabama played LSU, they ran Jalen Milroe into the ground with his offensive prowess and running game. That is what Jalen Milroe should be doing in college. He's not a pocket passer. He can throw on the run. He's a good quarterback. But he's an even better runner. There is no reason whatsoever Kalen DeBoer in that offense should have made Jalen Milroe a pocket passer this game for whatever reason. Milroe went 11 of 26, 164 yards, and 3 interceptions against a Brent Venables defense. Now, here's where I commend Oklahoma. Head coach Brent Venables, obviously, this isn't the season you want to have. You know, it didn't go your way. 5 losses on the season, not necessarily what Oklahoma fans are accustomed to when it comes to Sooner football, especially of teams past, like the Baker-led Sooner team, the Kyler Murray-led Sooner team, Jalen Hurts. The list goes on and on. I'll give a tip of the cap to Brent Venables, though, because it seems like he has Alabama's number. From all those years he was defensive coordinator at Clemson, you know, I think he had Alabama's number. He knew how to defend Alabama and the running quarterbacks. But the game plan, realistically, from my perspective, this is what their game plan was. Stop the run, force Jalen Milroe to throw the football. And they did. And it worked out to their favor. 3 interceptions on the day speaks for itself and 1 pick six. Now, I know that people are going to discuss that Ryan Williams touchdown that was called back, that wasn't really a touchdown because of illegal touching. I don't know about that. I thought it was a touchdown. I'm not going to deny that. I didn't see him step out of bounds. For the longest time, he didn't go out of bounds, and Ryan Williams wasn't really pushed out of bounds. So why in the hell would that be illegal touching? I have no clue. But tip of the cap to Brent Venables and Oklahoma. Jackson Arnold for Oklahoma had 25 carries and 131 rushing yards. Jeez. Like, good for the Sooners. Now, Alabama has to hope and pray that the committee finds them in their favor when it comes to the college football playoff final rankings in 2 weeks after the conference championship week. Alabama is out of the SEC race, and so is number 9, Ole Miss, losing to the Florida Gators 24-17 on senior day in the Swamp. Billy Napier has turned this entire program around. This is a completely different program the back half of the season. Earlier on in the season, especially after that loss to Miami in the opening week, 42-14, you know, everybody thought Billy Napier would have been fired or bought out, you know, by the midway point of the season. everybody realistically was saying that Florida might be only a 2-win team. Now Florida is looking like, they're looking like possibly a 7 to 8 win team now. They're trending upward. DJ Lagway is the truth when it comes to Florida. He's a true freshman, but let me tell you, he plays like a vet. He really does. And because of 2 Jackson Dart interceptions on the final 2 drives, number 9 Ole Miss falls to Florida 24-17, and realistically out of the college football playoff race and certainly out of the SEC race. But if you had to compare Alabama to Ole Miss, I don't know who you'd choose. I think both of these teams are firmly out of the college football playoff hunt. All right. Arizona State 28 upsets number 14 BYU 28-23 on a last-second Hail Mary attempt. They had to clear the fields first, but last-second Hail Mary failed for BYU. They now drop their 2nd straight game. And now 2 more upsets that happened. Number 15, Texas A&M on the road against Auburn. Comes up short, 43-41. Wow. Marcel Reed, I feel bad for A&M. The game was in your hands. To tie it up, it was in your hands. But nope, they dropped the ball, metaphorically speaking, and literally. They dropped the ball to tie the game in overtime, which is hysterical. And then Kansas, 5-6 Kansas, upsets Colorado 37-21. This is the 3rd straight week that Kansas has beat a ranked team as an unranked team. Devin Neal had his way with Colorado this game. 37 carries, 207 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So Kansas has already beaten Iowa State, BYU, and now Colorado. That's impressive. And we're going to talk about the mess that's the Big 12 Conference Championship race. So that's the slate for this past weekend. Now, what are some important games to look forward to for this upcoming Saturday, November 30th? Well, you got Oklahoma State and Colorado at Boulder Field. This is a must-win for Colorado. Georgia Tech going to Athens to play Georgia. I have no real hope that Georgia Tech will win that game. The game, Michigan at Ohio State. Tennessee, Vanderbilt, South Carolina and Clemson, UTSA and Army, Maryland and Penn State, Notre Dame, USC, Auburn and Alabama in the Iron Bowl, Miami and Syracuse, and Cal and SMU. Those are some of the more notable games. Oh, also, and the game of the week. The winner of this it decides who goes to the SEC title game against Georgia. Texas against Texas A&M at College Station. The first time that these 2 teams have met since 2011, where Justin Tucker kicked a game-winning field goal for Texas to win by 2. So that's the slate for the Saturday, the 30th games. So now, before we get into the conference outlooks, let's go over the college football, the AllState playoff prediction. As you all know, I've done it to death the past couple weeks. Each team has a certain percentage to make the college football playoff, and here's what it stands like now. Oregon and Ohio State basically at 100% guarantee in. Possibly, this could easily change. Penn State at 99%, Texas at 98%, Indiana at 98%, Georgia at 91%, Notre Dame at 90%, Miami at 80%, Tennessee at 76%, Boise State at 68%, SMU 63%, Alabama 37%. So now here's the back half of that. Iowa State 28%, Arizona State 26%, BYU 26%, Tulane 25%, Clemson 24%, South Carolina 23%, UNLV 16%, Army 13%, Colorado 7%, Texas A&M 6%, Ole Miss 6%. So realistically, I could see, if it came to it, I can see South Carolina making a push. If they beat Clemson this upcoming week, I think South Carolina puts themselves in a great position to be represented in the college football playoff. I really do. just because of how well they've been playing. And I think Clemson's been playing well too, but realistically, we'll figure out how good these two teams really are. I think it'll be a fantastic game to watch. All right, so obviously, we just went over the college football playoff all-state predictions. Now, let's go over the conferences, and let's see how this is going to shape up. We're in for a wild finish when it comes to college football. I'm going to talk a little bit about each conference, but here is the conference outlooks for all of the Power 4 conferences. AAC, we already know that the American Conference is set between Army and Tulane. The Mountain West is more than likely going to be Boise State and UNLV, again, a rematch from last year. So let's go over the Big Four, Power 4 conferences. We're going to start with the SEC. So if you look at this prompt right here, obviously Georgia clinched the SEC title spot, their SEC title spot, with that Ole Miss and Alabama loss. Now, there was a time in this conference where we all thought that, you know, it was coming down to realistically 6 teams. You got Georgia, Texas, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Alabama, and there was one more, Tennessee. That's realistically who was going to possibly make the SEC title game. But since Alabama choked against Oklahoma in embarrassing fashion, I might add, and Ole Miss choked to Florida in hilarious, embarrassing fashion, Georgia clinches their spot in the SEC title, despite having their losses. You know, everybody was writing off Georgia after that loss to Ole Miss, but Georgia's playing really good football right now, and it wouldn't shock me whatsoever if they did win the SEC. But now when it comes to the big game, Texas A&M, first meeting since 2011 at Kyle Field at College Station. Okay, if Texas avoids turnovers and quits putting Quinn Ewers in terrible situations where he wants to just be a gunslinger and throw the ball at random, I can see Texas winning this game. But as we all know, College Station is one of the toughest places to play in all of college football. It would not shock me whatsoever if Texas A&M comes back after an embarrassing loss to Auburn, where all they had to do was catch a 2-point conversion. It would not shock me whatsoever if Texas A&M comes into College Station at home on Senior Day and win this game and go on to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. So my personal prediction, you know, teams that just come off a heartbreaking loss, you know, sometimes they're rattled, but I think this team will be hyped up to play Texas for the first time in 13 years. I think Texas A&M wins this game 24-17, and I think Texas A&M will end up going to the SEC title game against Georgia. So this is realistically, this is what we have right now in the SEC. Obviously, everything can change this weekend, but that's my personal opinion. I think Georgia, it's going to be Georgia and Texas A&M for the SEC title game. Now, I don't necessarily think Texas A&M can make the college football playoff if they lose, because it's hard to punish a team for making the conference championship. I don't know. There's just so much up in the air when it comes to this. All right, so we got the SEC out of the way. Let's go into the mess, what is known as the Big 12. Take a look at this prompt. Mathematically, there are 8 teams that are tied for the first place in the Big 12 conference because of certain outlooks of games. The only team on this prompt that is mathematically eliminated, for all I know, is TCU. I don't believe they have the wins to back up their justification to possibly make the Big 12. But if you look at this, you got Arizona State leading the pack 6-2, BYU 6-2, Iowa State 6-2, Colorado 6-2, and then Baylor 5-3, Kansas State 5-3, TCU 5-3, Texas Tech 5-3, West Virginia 5-3. There is just so much going on with this. So I had to look this up because I was not smart enough to try and figure this all out. But I'm going to give you just a bare bones what needs to happen for certain teams to make it to the Big 12 championship. So Arizona State, obviously they're leading the Big 12 right now, which is kind of crazy. They were picked to finish last, 16 out of 16 teams in the Big 12, and yet come the end of November, they're number 1 right now in the Big 12. Fascinating. And let me just say, one of their running back, Cam Scattaboo, he's quietly probably a top 5, top 3 college football running back right now. He's putting up unreal numbers this year. So Arizona State, they go to the Big 12 title game. All they need to do is win against Arizona this upcoming week. That's how Arizona State gets to the Big 12 title. Now, because of Colorado's loss to Kansas, this opens the door for Iowa State to sneak back in. Colorado controlled their own destiny. Now they don't. Now they have to have a lot of help. But Iowa State now, all they have to do is beat Kansas State this upcoming weekend, and then they go. That's the more plausible route that it's going to take in the Big 12. I'm pretty sure that this more than likely is going to happen in Arizona State versus Iowa State Big 12 championship, and winner of that will go to the college football playoff. But that's what Iowa State needs. They just need to beat Kansas State, and they're going to the Big 12 title. All right, let's go to the big chokers recently, BYU. So, for BYU to go to the Big 12 title game, they need to beat Houston, and they have to have either Arizona State or Iowa State lose this upcoming weekend, which I don't necessarily see happening, but it's possible. It's not undoable for BYU. But the last team needs a little bit more help. This is how Colorado goes to the Big 12 title game. They have to beat Oklahoma State. That's a given. Then they need 2 combined losses by either Arizona State, Iowa State, or BYU. They need 2 of those 3 teams to lose this upcoming weekend, and they need to win their game against Oklahoma State. The Big 12 realistically is the biggest crapshoot of a conference right now, just because of the sheer number of teams that are still mathematically in it. Mathematically, Baylor, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia all have an outside shot to get to the Big 12 championship. Do I see that happening? No. The most realistic thing I see happening this upcoming week is Arizona State handles business against Arizona, and Iowa State handles business against Kansas State. And I think it will be Arizona State going against Iowa State for the Big 12 title game. Now, based off the seedings, based off the AP rankings, and based off the College Football Committee rankings coming out tonight, it's very possible that if Arizona State were to win, they would only get the 12 seed, or vice versa, Iowa State, if they were to win the Big 12, get the 12th seed as the automatic bid, but they would still have to play. They would not get a bye because Boise State is still ranked ahead of them. Boise State is still the higher ranked conference champion. It's very confusing. It really is, but I've grown to understand it a little bit more. But this is the Big 12 mess right now. I don't even realistically know who needs to win and who needs to lose for Baylor, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia to have a chance. I know a lot of crap needs to happen, and judging based on West Virginia's position being at the 9th spot in the Big 12, I imagine they would need all 4 teams ahead, all 4 of the top teams to lose, and then probably beat somewhere in the middle. The Big 12 is a crapshoot. It really is. But me personally, I think it's going to be Arizona State and Iowa State competing for the Big 12 title game and getting one of those playoff bids. All right, so we're going to move on to the ACC. This is the most cut and dry, scenario that's out there. Take a look at this. So SMU, with their win over Virginia this past weekend, they, in their first season as a member of the ACC, they're the first team to clinch their spot in the Charlotte title game in the ACC. Credit to Rhett Lashley. He's done a phenomenal job. They have one of the most prolific offenses in all of college football, in my opinion. They're one of the more well-rounded college football teams in America right now. You know, they have a great offense. They really do. They got a bunch of old Miami Hurricanes on that roster that I know all too well, who are very good players. Rhett Lashley, the former offensive coordinator for the Miami Hurricanes about 2 or 3 years ago, before the Mario Cristobal era. You know, Rhett Lashley, he was fantastic at what he did at Miami. With De'Aaron King and certain offensive weapons that he had during that time, he was with the Hurricanes. You know, Rhett Lashley's a great coach. Rhett Lashley has been around the block. He knows what to expect. And already he's got his team in a position to possibly make the college football playoff. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But, so SMU clinches their spot in the ACC. They've been playing outstanding football. Now, it's only down to 2 other teams who's possibly going to Charlotte to face the Mustangs for the ACC title game. That's Miami and that's Clemson. Nobody could have predicted this to happen. That Miami and Clemson, it would come down to see who would be the second one representing the ACC in the title game. But, you know, a tip of the cap again to the Mustangs. Rhett Lashley's really cooking something up in Dallas right now. He's doing phenomenal there. But it's very simple for the Hurricanes because Clemson has already finished conference play. They finished 7-1 in conference play with their loss to Louisville. And now this upcoming week they play South Carolina. That's more playoff implications than it is ACC implications because Clemson's done with ACC play. So they finished the season with 7-1 in conference play. It's simple for the Miami Hurricanes. They win at Syracuse. They're going to Charlotte to face SMU for the ACC championship. It's the most cut and dry out of all the conferences. Miami win and in. Clemson, Miami loss, they're in. That's how it works. It's so cut and dry. You know, everybody knows I'm a fan. But realistically, here's what I'm going for now. I can realistically see Miami against SMU in the ACC title game. I'm not going to make any predictions, but I do see a scenario now in the college football playoff where 2 ACC teams could possibly get in. And that would be that would only be if Miami and Clemson, whoever makes it to the ACC title game against SMU, if they were to beat SMU, obviously the winner of the ACC will get that automatic bid. I also see if it's a close game, I can see SMU, a 2-loss SMU, with getting to their conference championship. I can realistically see SMU leapfrogging a 3-loss SEC team. I know last week I was talking about should a 1-loss Indiana team jump over a 2-loss SEC team. I didn't necessarily think they would get the nod. But now because of those losses with Ole Miss and Alabama and BYU, you know, with all those big losses that just happened in college football over this past weekend, I can realistically see a scenario where the ACC gets 2 teams to the dance, and that's only if SMU loses the conference championship, because I still think a 2-loss ACC team, a 2-loss SMU team, with one of their losses coming to BYU at the time, which possibly could still rep the Big 12 championship game, and a conference championship loss, which they still got to. That's more of a resume to me than it is Alabama at 3 losses, Ole Miss at 3 losses. You know, there's just so much that goes into it. But the ACC, wide open right now. Simple, SMU has clinched with their win over Virginia, and they await patiently the final game between Miami and Syracuse. That's the game that decides the ACC champion matchup. Miami wins, they're in. They lose, they're out. And Clemson is in. So now we're going to move on to our final conference. We're going to talk about the Big Ten. Now, last week against Wisconsin, in a nail-biter and honestly some head-scratching calls against the Oregon Ducks, Oregon clinched the Big Ten, one of the Big Ten title spots against Wisconsin last week. They were on a bye this past week. Their final game is Washington. I think Washington moved to the Big Ten. I'm not really entirely sure, but that doesn't really have much implications when it comes to this. But Oregon, they clinched. They're in the Big Ten title game no matter what, and more than likely in the college football playoff no matter what, because Oregon is the only remaining undefeated team in college football. So now there's 3 other teams that are possible and still alive in the Big Ten to represent said conference to go up against Oregon. You got Ohio State. It's very cut and dry and very simple for the Buckeyes. Beat the team up north. That's it. They beat the team up north. They're going back to the Big Ten title game for a rematch against Oregon, the only team to hand them a loss this year. So now when you look at the other 2, you got Penn State. They need to win this weekend, and they have to have Ohio State lose to Michigan. That's a tough ask. Indiana has an even tougher position to sit in. They need to win their game this week against Purdue, but they also need Ohio State and Penn State. They need them both to lose in order to get back to the Big Ten title game. Realistically, I think this conference only goes one way, and that's a rematch between Oregon and Ohio State, which I think Ohio State would end up beating Oregon. Neutral field, I said this months ago when it happened, weeks ago when it happened. A neutral field, or if it's at the Horseshoe, Ohio State probably wins by 2 touchdowns. At least a touchdown. Now, you head to a neutral field against Oregon again. Now, I'll say Oregon is red hot. They're deservingly so, I think, the best team in college football. But you can definitely make the argument for the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think it's going to be Oregon and Ohio State in a rematch. And I think at the end of the day, Ohio State will end up getting that first round bye, because I think Ohio State in a rematch in the Big Ten title game, they'd end up beating Oregon. I trust Ohio State a little bit more. I don't necessarily trust Ryan Day, but I do trust the roster that is Ohio State's over the Oregon Ducks. I think it would be another shootout. I think it will be. But I don't see any way possible that this Michigan team with no passing game walks into Columbus and beats Ohio State. I don't see it happening. Now, it could be hysterical. If it does happen, maybe. Who knows? But I think realistically, everybody knows that Michigan doesn't have a damn chance to beat Ohio State this year. If Michigan, by some miracle, does, Ryan Day will probably be fired. This Michigan team, you have lost 3 straight against Michigan and have failed to win the big game, realistically, if you're head coach Ryan Day. I think this game defines his career up to this point. This game against Michigan this week defines Ryan Day's career. Just because they are having a down year. Now, Donovan Edwards and that great offensive line is still there, so it's possible to run on Ohio State just a little bit. If Ryan Day loses this game, I think there's grounds for termination. Do I think it's going to happen? No, absolutely not. I think it's going to be a rematch between Oregon and Ohio State, and I think Ohio State is going to go on and become Big Ten champions. And that's going to wrap it up this week on the Lake Show, everyone. Again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. Keep those likes and keep those subscriptions coming. You know, we're almost at 200. We need 8 more for 200. You know, I'm just very blessed to be doing this in general. It's just a fun time. It's an escape from, you know, the worldly things that just consume us daily. But again, I thank my Lord and Savior every single day that He's blessed me with an opportunity just to do this, because, you know, it's just a fun time doing this, whether or not this goes anywhere in the future. I just love doing it and providing content for all of you to enjoy when it comes to college football and NFL and all sports related issues. But as you all know, I'm very grateful for all of you. So thank you for all. Thank you all. And happy holidays. Happy Thanksgiving to all. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror.